So here it is. Some people are really going to hate this video. It's the much requested "Why is everyone autistic now?" video. So definitely going to ruffle a few feathers. So let me start this by saying that autism is real, unlike ADHD, for example. I've done another video on ADHD. That one's pretty easy. That was a pretty easy video. It doesn't exist. The end. That's ADHD. Autism's a bit more tricky because it does exist. It's profound, it's devastating, which is precisely why, as with trauma, its dilution into a lifestyle identity is a moral outrage, right? So real autism isn't, how can I put this, collecting fidget toys and announcing your neurotype on TikTok. It's a 5-year-old kid who can't tell his mum that he wants a drink or that he loves her. Spends 3 hours a day screaming because somebody moved the cereal box. Okay, that's real autism. This leaves their poor, exhausted, and frankly at times probably suicidal parents wondering how they're going to get through the day or even like the rest of their life. That's the effect that real autism has. So when people say idiotic nonsense like we're all a bit autistic, you can take it that they've never met the real version, real autism, where the child is fully nonverbal, sleeping 3 hours a night, headbutting the wall because the blue cup is in the dishwasher, right? Real autism, guys, is not preferring emails to phone calls. It's a really serious, debilitating condition that virtually destroys people and families. And to claim that you're autistic when you aren't is pretty damn near to stolen valor, in my view. Masquerading as a soldier who's given service and risked their life where in fact you were nothing of the kind. To self-identify and self-diagnose with serious conditions when you don't in fact have them is really dodgy, and people should stop doing it. And the worst of all is that professionals, medical professionals, are aiding and abetting this fraud, right? So here's my main argument. Let's outline some terms. So the Lancet Commission in December 2021 formally adopted the term profound autism. Do you know why they had to do that? The reason they did that, and it would be defined as minimally verbal or non-verbal, cannot self-advocate, needs 24-hour care, that sort of stuff, serious autism. The reason they had to invent that term is because there were so many people self-diagnosing with fake autism. They were, the real autistic people, if you like, were kind of being erased from a spectrum that was now dominated by the extremely mildly affected or the completely non-affected people. So the severest cases, real autism, were actually had to be given a new name because they weren't findable within their own diagnosis. And that we've seen exactly the same thing happen with trauma. People with real PTSD, people have actually spent 2 or 3 days being bombed in a muddy ditch, just sure that they were going to die. Children who've been attacked within an inch of their life or survived attacks by wild animals, victims of abuse, real abuse, being put in the same spectrum as people who are upset that their parents got divorced, right? We've seen this playbook before. It's the same playbook. So this video is on behalf of those families, the real sufferers. It's not against autistic people, okay? Some figures. In the US, the CDC, Center for Disease Control, in 2000, there were 1 in 150 children likely diagnosed with some kind of autistic tendencies. Now it's 1 in 31. That's 2022 data, nearly a 5-fold rise in a generation. people will say, well, yeah, because the methods of diagnosis are better, we're catching more people, as it were. No, it's because neurodivergent nonsense, this neurodivergent totem pole of suffering, is proliferating on social media. Most of all, that kind of satanic, the most satanic platform of all, TikTok. It's a social contagion is what's doing it. That's proliferating on social media platforms, most of all TikTok, telling people that they're ill with an illness that they don't really have. That's what it is. It's a social contagion. It's a foot up on the oppression totem pole. It's that same intersectional status game that's been destroying children's heads via these bloody awful social media platforms like TikTok for 10 years now. It's just the latest in a long line of disabilities you can be convinced that you have by a social media platform that's owned by the Chinese Communist Party and is obviously a Trojan horse of many hues. UK figures: Exeter Russell study in the Journal of Child Psychology and Psychiatry 2021 saw a 787% rise in recorded autism diagnoses between 1998 and 2018. The steepest rises were in adults and females, which slightly changes the argument a bit. Up until 2020, 2021, for sure, this was your usual suspects. This was a white middle class youth, TikTok and Reddit-led social contagion. Now it's moving more to adults and females, university adjacent or academic adjacent, sophisticates, the more sophisticated upper middle classes, not necessarily just your alienated teenagers on Reddit. NHS figures today: 236,000 people on the autism assessment waiting list in mid-2025. Average wait 16 to 17 months and climbing. So ask the obvious question: did human neurology change like in the last 25 years significantly, or did the incentives change? Obviously, it's the incentives. What do you get for being disabled? Well, in the UK today, the answer is quite a lot, actually. Practical question, really. In the UK, lots of money available for these types of disabilities, lots of free passes available for these types of disabilities. We'll go into this more shortly. Lots of foot-ups available for these kinds of disabilities. So this is the same sort of subject area as the ADHD video that I did, obviously. These epidemics don't take place in countries where the incentives for having these conditions don't exist, or in places where the questionnaire-led diagnosis is not widespread. They just don't exist. So how did this is a dilution of the classic type that we've investigated in other videos on ADHD and trauma. It's the classic playbook. How did it occur in the case of autism? Well, our primary witness, if you like, is Alan Francis, who has confessed his dismay at his part in this. He's a psychiatrist who chaired the DSM-4 task force back in the 90s, I think, that somewhat rewrote the rules on the autism diagnosis, diluted it a bit. And he's gone on record saying that he's very sorry for doing so, because when they did that, they were expecting the diagnosis rates to, triple, something like that. Get a bit more action, a few more people in through the gate, as it were. What actually happened is that they multiplied like 100-fold. So his book, Saving Normal, is a kind of insider's confession about how that happened, right? So a good quote from that book is as follows. I really like this: "The power to label is the power to destroy." When these dilutions of these diagnoses turn from being, I suppose, well-meaning probably initially to catch more people that were being missed by the net, as it were, but have turned into industries and social contagions that are grabbed onto by dissembling social media platforms that are well known as being Trojan horses into our children's mental and emotional health. And when it gets hijacked by those kinds of hostile forces, and obviously, I mean, good on him for coming out. I mean, how many people like to put their hand up and say that they were wrong or that they were part and parcel of bringing about something this serious? That's like Mr. Nobody. Nobody does that. So 10 out of 10 for him or her. I'm not actually sure. I presume it's a man. DSM-5, 2013. Asperger's was abolished. These kinds of neurodivergent disorders were put onto a spectrum, and they did the same thing with addiction, where they got rid of substance abuse and substance dependence, made substance use disorder on a spectrum. Well, they did the same thing with neurodivergent illnesses or neurodevelopmental conditions like ADHD. They were folded into one spectrum. Now, that sounds like a good idea, apart from it hasn't quite turned out like that. So a category that's engineered so a sort of child in nappies can be the same as a sort of chatty software developer or something who doesn't like small talk. You know, the idea that they can share a diagnosis that's just along the different lines of a spectrum. I mean, again, we know this playbook. This is the intersectional, no such thing as gender, nonsense spectrum, dissembling, morally relativistic. Let's make everything non-understandable. Let's pretend we don't know what you're talking about when you mention things that are black and white categories. Let's destroy categories of things. And that is straight out the postmodernist playbook, is straight out the modern social Marxist playbook. This is not a constructive direction of travel. And it certainly has no place in healthcare. I will bring to your memory again Nick Haslam, who's a bit of a star in this regard and bringing all this stuff to light. So his concept of concept creep. So that was originally in, I think it was Psychological Inquiry magazine, 2016. The idea that concepts of harm can expand vertically and horizontally, which means to say they expand vertically and they get ever milder and milder and milder. So they pull in more people. More people can be identified as ill or oppressed or within this concept or this diagnosis. It might even just be a straight up a very cynical business reason for doing it, a commercial reason for doing it. But for whatever reason, the amount of people that are able to be picked up by this increases. And then it sort of expands horizontally as well, and there's ever new phenomena. We're finding ever new sources of harm, ever new disabilities, ever new oppressions. You know? So trauma did it, bullying did it, addiction did it, and now autism is just the latest. And so this is what Haslam would call diagnostic inflation, right? Now we get on to it. The idea that when even very woke universities are talking about this as though it's a problem, you know it's a problem. So Drexel University, who I've trolled mercilessly before for being the wokest university in existence, have even done a study on this. It was a TikTok study where they found that of the most popular hashtag autism videos, 11.5 billion collective views, only 27% were accurate and 41% contained flat-out inaccuracies. So, for example, symptoms that were mentioned that aren't really symptoms included and that were circulating on these mediums included things like having a strong sense of social justice or feeling confused and overwhelmed. So that's obviously not a symptom list, that's a horoscope. I mean, this is, again, exactly the same as the dilution of trauma and PTSD, the dilution of ADHD, well, the invention of ADHD. So Reddit and TikTok, as we've mentioned, are the main proliferators. They're the main vectors of the spread of this social contagion illness. They're like the mosquito, if you like. And so those platforms are like think of them like a diagnostic pipeline. That's how I think of it. You watch the video, you recognize yourself in the moronic statements that they give, you self-identify, you arrive at the clinician's office demanding confirmation of your self-diagnosis. He or she gives you a questionnaire to fill in. And when you fill in enough tick boxes, you've got the illness. So here's the most disturbing thing to me about this, is that it starts to really bend truth, and it forces or takes people hostage. People like myself working in mental health are then kind of taken hostage, and it's demanded that we also agree that you are in fact a 5 foot tall hamburger, whereas in fact you're clearly a human being. So I call it the self-diagnosis is valid sort of contagion. So put it this way, imagine if self-diagnosis for cancer or schizophrenia was valid. It's not, again, a good direction of travel, is it? So what's to blame really right underneath it all? As always, postmodernism, those dodgy sort of Rousseau-based French postmodernist Foucault and those other devilish characters. Their brand of non-economic Marxism, social Marxism, anarchism really, is alive and well here in healthcare. And so the postmodernist argument would kind of, in this sense, in this context, would be neurodivergence is the latest spectrum. As I said, it's a flag. It's a bio in your Instagram. It's a position in the victim hierarchy. Neurospicy. It behaves like an identity movement, not like a medical category, basically. It's there, and it's just another one of those, because it's always there next to the pride flags, the awareness months, the sort of heresy rules that you must not break, all of that. So it's so clearly the same phenomena. Here's another thing that causes a lot of problems. The what I call preemptive absolution. So I'm not rude, I'm autistic. I'm not flaky, weird, I'm neurodivergent. Don't hold me to the same standard. And it's the same thing with trauma and aping PTSD. I'm not a psychopath. I've got trauma. No, stop behaving like a psychopath. It's not acceptable. You don't have PTSD. You're a normal person. So this is a bit like this. Don't hold me to the same standards. It's a get out of jail free card. Same kind of get out of jail free card as ADHD, by the way, but with a much stronger moral shield actually, because autism is clearly real and we can see it's real. We've all seen some examples of real autism. So borrowing the name potentially buys a lot of immunity, right? A lot of sympathy, a big shield that you don't deserve if you don't have it, obviously. So it's stolen valor. It's we should not be doing that. We should not be encouraging that. It is not morally right. So are there people that profit from this? And of course, the answer is yes. Private assessment could cost you anything between £1,000 and £2,000, so $2,000 to $3,000 American dollars. Imagine clinics that have, surprise, surprise, 100% diagnosis rate. There are Australian clinics, I like to joke, have got queues going round the corner. These are, I call them ADHD mills. They're like the bloody OxyContin mills. They're like the pill mills in the Appalachian Mountains in the 1990s. That's what they're like. Come here and get your diagnosis. So it's autism mills, ADHD mills and autism mills, ADHD and autism diagnosis mills. Of course, we will write you the diagnosis. You want it, we can give it. Just come here, pay and get it. Now, why would people do that? Well, there are benefits that we'll come to. Therapists and coaches have got, obviously, a vested interest in this. They are like with the it's like trauma-informed care, that contagion that has occurred over the last 10 years. Every counsellor now is trauma-informed because they know that's what people want and will pay for. That's why they say they do it. They're not necessarily trauma-informed. It's difficult to really understand what trauma-informed really is. Trauma promiscuous, prepared to say you're that you're traumatized as long as you pay me enough. Is that what trauma-informed care means? Well, it's a bit like that. Therapists and coaches have autism-affirming practice. So what that means really is that they've just captured a nice little market niche, right? And again, as with ADHD, in the UK, we've seen NEETs. That means kids, young people who are not in education, employment, or training. They can get a lot more benefits if they claim to have neurodevelopmental or neurodivergent issues. It will get them out of education or employment with a get out of jail free card. They will get more benefits. So this is a direct cause of our, how would we call this, economic inactivity explosion. The lack of productivity of the economies of the Western world is being affected by this stuff. It's a bit like the steroids in sport argument as well. Once accommodations start to exist, you're in a slippery slope. Non-diagnosis is a competitive disadvantage. Right, so what's the cost? Building on this, we've already started looking at it, but let's round up. The costs are different depending on which group of people you are. So let's remember the real sufferers here. So the cost to the profoundly autistic, the people with real autism, is research money, clinical inattention, public sympathy, if it's being diluted to such a huge degree, and waiting lists that are so clogged up with self-referred adults that genuinely disabled children are going to have to wait years, right? So then there's the cost to the self-diagnosed themselves. Yes, there is a cost for you. It's a fake identity, more than likely. And if it is, then it's going to arrest your development or that of your teenage, adolescent son or daughter, that you feel good about the fact that they have this diagnosis now, because it just explains everything. But that's a lazy solution, because this identity, if it's not profound autism, if it's just a load of other things, a load of normal human variation, or indeed a load of lazinesses or unwillingnesses to do other things, sort of palmed off as autism, well, that's going to arrest their development, right? It's the same doom loop as a fake ADHD diagnosis. Adopt the sick role at 18, 19 years old, and then every hard thing becomes inaccessible. You promised yourself that you can't change, and so guess what? You won't change. The counterexample to this is addicts, recovering addicts, as I've said so many times. This is how not to be a victim, right? Addicts, recovering addicts, are people with a sort of objectively catastrophic behavioral condition, obviously. Smoking crack and doing fentanyl kills and maims you, right? But when we come into recovery, we self-identify as addicts. That is the same, for sure, of course. But we don't use that identification to be a victim. Quite the opposite, actually. We assume discipline, routine, responsibility, community. We identify with our illness, but we don't do it to become a victim. In fact, part of becoming a recovering addict really is an acknowledgement of the fact that you yourself probably were the victimizer. If you're an addict, then you're probably traumatizing your own family and to some extent victimizing your family. So self-identification as an addict, I've got this illness, and then partaking of difficult things that you have to do to recover, one of those difficult things is to acknowledge that you are the problem, not the others. So the onus is on you to change. And the same is true with huge swathes of youth who are currently palming off their problems with fake ADHD diagnoses and autism diagnoses, oftentimes aided and abetted by medical professionals, oftentimes aided and abetted by their parents, when in reality, it's them that are causing the problem by refusing to study, refusing to work, refusing to stop using drugs, refusing to do anything they don't want to do, and blaming it on autism or ADHD. It's a scourge. So, in close, let's just put it this way. All right, if you're 22, 21, 22, and you've decided you're autistic because some grifter on TikTok told you that you are, hand back the stolen valor card. Hand it back. You don't want it. That card belongs to a child who will never be able to say his own name, not you.